Welcome at GoBeyond. In this series, we discuss the most important trends that we see in the e-commerce world and hear from the innovators who are moving with them. Today, we're going to talk about cross-border success. E-commerce has made international expansion more accessible than ever before. While digital channels may vary by country or region, consumers in all major markets already have them deeply ingrained into their daily lives. Whether that's browsing online marketplaces or scrolling social media feeds. This gives businesses the opportunity to target consumers on the other side of the planet in ways we only dreamed of a decade or two ago. The pandemic has only accelerated this trend, bringing ever more people's shopping habits online and boosting investment into shoppable functionality by platforms as wide-ranging as Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, Pinterest and TikTok, not to mention their Asian counterparts. That's a potential market of billions of monthly users at businesses' fingertips. So how can businesses turn these users into cross-border customers? Today we discuss the keys to successfully growing an e-commerce business beyond borders with a panel of market leaders and innovators. You're about to meet three interesting people. At the table we have Crystal, e-commerce manager at UPS. Dialing in from Austria, we have Martin Pensi, co-founder and CEO at Nuki Home Solutions. And also digital with us from Belgium, Luca Cassetti, Secretary General at e-commerce Europe. And to kick off, let's first have a look at cross-border success closer to home. For a small European e-commerce business that wants to start exporting within Europe, what are the keys to a successful exporting strategy? Luca, as the representative of the European e-commerce sector, you have a unique insight into the European market. What are the key drivers and barriers to cross-border success on the continent?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Maybe very quickly on e-commerce Europe. E-commerce Europe is a lobbying organization. So what we do is mostly public affairs at European level. So we try to advocate for the interest of the European e-commerce sector towards EU policymakers. Coming back to your question, you said it before, e-commerce is a strong cross-border nature, which has increased over the past years due to the globalization, but also due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that the pandemic itself became probably the main growth driver for online shopping in 2020, at least according to our report as well. And for products, because for services, well, that's a little bit more complicated. There were huge losses due to the various lockdowns. And so, yeah, there was a growth, but the growth was smaller when you take services and products all together. In 2020, we have seen some interesting developments with regards to cross-border e-commerce. And maybe just to mention an interesting case that I always mention, Cheese Shop in Paris. So a proximity brick and mortar shop that previously served basically only local customer. Mm-hmm. This shop had to move online to continue to serve their customers during the forced closures and also to make the business survive. Actually, this company found out that there was an interest in their products also from other countries, and they started to sell abroad because Belgian consumers wanted to have the same cheese that these people in the neighborhood in Paris wanted to have. So I guess that the digital or the omni-channel transformation of retail is probably one of the key drivers leading to cross-border e-commerce success. And that goes hand in hand with the green transition of the sector, which is another important driver at the moment.
Yes.
And besides this twin green and digital transition, there are, of course, other drivers. There's use of data, new innovative solutions that can boost cross-border trade.
So you see less borders, I think.
Yes, we see less borders, but we also see some barriers still.
Yes.
And that's a little bit the downside of this. Yes. So e-commerce by itself is without borders because you can reach any customer all over the world, but in reality, this is not so easy. If we take the European Union specifically, I would say that the main challenge for online merchants when they want to go abroad and expand their business abroad is the high level of regulatory fragmentation across member states. There is also a tendency for member states to go beyond what's written in European law. This is called gold plating. And this is also an issue because potentially you have to deal with 27 different systems, and it's very burdensome, especially if you're an SME. So when I talk to SMEs, that's what they tell me. The biggest problem is usually regulatory fragmentation.
Yes, and Luca, do the drivers for success differ between European Union countries, and do they differ between European Union and non-European Union countries?
Good question. Not very easy to answer as well. I mean, of course, there are many differences across the various European regions, and of course between European and non-European countries. The report that we publish every year is not specifically going into these details, so there are no different specific differences that are outlined in the report. But I can, of course, say that the European continent is home to very diverse e-commerce markets. Why that? Because we have digital skills, internet use, purchasing power, e-shopper penetration. These are all factors or variables that can impact the adoption and growth of e-commerce in the various countries. Just to give you an idea of how different that is in Europe. In terms of growth in 2020, according to our report, Western Europe had the highest share of total European e-commerce turnover, 64%. Southern Europe was only 16% of the total turnover. So if you take another region like Eastern Europe, and we have a look at the growth rate of that region, then you would be astonished maybe to see a 36% of growth rate. And Western Europe was only at 4%. So you can see that in Eastern Europe, new innovations were made, and the uptake of e-commerce went far beyond the expectations, thanks probably to the pandemic. So there are a lot of differences, I would say, yes.
And Martin, do you also see this difference?
Yes, of course. I mean, we are, as an e-commerce player or a brand that is mostly relying on e-commerce, we have the very, let's say, hands-on experience with the, let's say, macroeconomic situation that Luca just described. And I mean, it creates complexity, of course. But on the other hand, we also see it as a chance. So in our business, we are quite often compared to other players from the US. And of course, I mean, launching a product US-wide is much easier. You only have one language and so on. Whereas in Europe, you need to handle multiple languages. And that is a cost. It starts with translations and so on, and the cost that we need to understand individual customers. And it's not only about languages. So, for example, we are based in Austria. We are really a European brand and present in all major European markets. But for example, even in Switzerland, they are speaking the same language as we do in Austria, or almost the same language, but still is a totally different market. So you need to, also if you're in your go-to-market strategy and so on, you need to really nail it down to specific markets because they are different in Europe. And therefore, you cannot have a, let's say, generalized marketing strategy and assume that will work out in every market.
You need to know something of the culture.
Yes, you need to understand there are things that are highly different. So I don't know, in our situation, I mean, Nuki is European market leader for retrofit smart door locks. So for us, obviously, it's a device that you just mount on the inner side of your door, and in a few minutes, you can get rid of your physical keys and connect it through your smartphone. So because we are placed on top of the existing lock, for us, it's very important to understand the, let's say, the landscape of locks all over Europe. Now, this is an industry that is several hundred years old, and in each territory has grown into a little bit different directions. So locks in France are different from locks in Spain, are different from locks in Benelux, and so on. And therefore, you really need to understand the individual markets. Yes, but I think for us, at least, because you were asking for key drivers for success, for us, what was really a key driver was that we knew before we started, we were already thinking in, let's say, European terms. So we never had the idea that we launch our business and we will only, strive to be successful in Austria, because it was clear to us, Austria is a too small country in order to have a proper return on investment on the development work that we did and so on. So we knew upfront, okay, we need to go European-wide. We need to have a multi-language setting and so on. And then at least you are prepared.
Yeah, you already knew from the start.
we knew it's going to be challenging. Yes.
Do you have something to add to this, Crystal?
Yeah, exactly. A good foundation starts where there is online presence. First of all, you need to know, you need to have the knowledge where your target audience is and what their buying habits are. So what channels are they using? How do they want their goods to be delivered? At what speed do they want to have it delivered? What payment options do they prefer? But yeah, there is not one size that fits all for Europe. So some companies might want to use marketplaces in order to create this visibility in their markets, because marketplaces seems to be the best source for when you look for new goods or new products. On the other hand, other companies might not want to release their brand equity and their knowledge base or their database towards those marketplaces. And what we also see is that social commerce, which is still much lower or smaller in Europe, is growing though. So, but not uniformly. So, for instance, in Italy and in Spain, the social buyers, if you compare them to the internet buyers, they are respectively at 37 and 31%. But however, in other countries, it might be much lower. If you go more eastward to Russia, for instance, you see that the internet buyers, so from a total group of internet buyers, 50% is social buyers. So you need to adapt accordingly and need to do your homework, in fact. So that's important.
Is it also maybe more easier to start with the countries around you? Or is it not necessary?
Yeah, sure. To their point as well, because of the language.
Yes,
and yeah, and also
Austria.
If we need to do business with the Netherlands, it's also easier for us as Belgians to do business with Netherlands. But indeed, yeah, it's go around, and then also the distance is not that far, so transit times are also shortened. So. This has also an impact on the customer experience. But yeah, indeed, first go around and then look further to further markets.
That's the best advice.
Yeah, exactly.
And Luca, your organization publishes detailed reports on the European e-commerce markets for your members and European policymakers. Are there certain markets in Europe which, according to your analysis, have a lower barrier to entry for European e-commerce business?
Yeah, indeed. Every year around summer, we publish this European B2C e-commerce market report, which is made by a Dutch research institute, by the way. And it contains a lot of useful information for merchants on the various European markets. It's not only covering the European Union, it's covering actually continental Europe, I think, up to 37 countries. So if a merchant is really interested in expanding to a specific country, he can get some essential information on that specific market and maybe make a better informed choice if he should expand there or not.
Yes.
But to come back to your question, it's a little bit difficult for me to answer it because the report is not looking into that specifically. And actually, because there are many variables defining the level of difficulty or maybe the easiness to enter a specific market. I mentioned before e-shopper penetration, but there is also digitalization, the infrastructure, the language, the distance, the digital skills, not only of the businesses, but also of the consumers that buy online. We have seen, for example, that during COVID-19, consumers that before didn't buy online at all, they started doing that, and they're likely to continue doing so also after the pandemic. So there are so many different variables that it's difficult for me to point to a specific country or specific countries with a lower barrier to entry.
Yes. Yep. So, and it's not only distance and language, but there are a lot of other factors.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
This is also what we see. So those geographical differences occur, but in the end, what it all boils down to is that customers or consumers, they want to have choices.
Yes.
So they want to have choice and they want to have an impact on how their goods are going to be delivered. So researchers also show that, for instance, the delivery speed and the costs are the main factors of the cart abandonment rate in Europe.
Yes.
So in order to tackle these, you need to offer choices anyway. So a lot of choice, and the first or the most important one is to offer choices in terms of delivery speed.
Yeah.
And then there are also additional options that consumers want. For instance, businesses, they can offer alternate locations for goods to be delivered in order to have home delivery. And this then brings down the costs, but at the same speed.
Yes.
And then what we also see is that Saturday or weekend deliveries become more common. If you can, as a company, can deliver on Saturday, this is really speeding up your delivery time.
Yes, and do you also see that the returning costs may be a problem? Because if from the Netherlands you ship back to Norway, the costs are higher than you ship to Belgium. And it may be...
yeah, exactly. This is also an impact. The returns, it's not easy. So before you start up your business, you need to understand how are you going to handle your returns.
Yes.
And what type of goods are you offering online in order to maybe reduce those type of returns. So this really needs to be looked into closely.
Yes.
Exactly.
And Martin, how did Nuki Home Solutions take the first step into exporting?
As I said earlier, we were planning, let's say, to go all over Europe right from the start, but still in our strategy and as an early stage startup, you cannot put focus on 7 markets at the same time. Yeah? So for us, and probably also being Austrians, it was natural to start with the single largest market in Europe, which is Germany first. And we very much focused on creating some initial awareness and so on in Germany. That was really successful. And starting out from there, then, some of the, let's say, German awareness also moved on to the Netherlands and Benelux. There was some spillover. You also have Austria and Switzerland. So then the whole thing started working.
And it's almost the same language also. So Germany was maybe also easy then.
Yes, that was, of course, easy. And it's really important to understand the local customer. And at least in Germany, we can understand the language. But then again, because I said being Austrians, then Southern Germans are quite similar to Austrians. If you take Northern Germans, it's completely different. So even for us, it's hard to understand, let's say, the local customer.
But did you first do a survey then before you were going to start exporting to Germany?
Nuki started to life as a Kickstarter project, actually. So, and we always saw our Kickstarter campaign more or less as a big survey, because when you launch on Kickstarter, you present your product concept and you ask the community if they are willing to pay for this kind of product. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's the most honest survey you can do, because if people need to swipe their credit card, then obviously they are willing to pay. And if not, then they don't do it. And that was for us, it was a big success, our Kickstarter campaign at that time. Back in 2016, it was the most successful campaign in Europe. So, and that, let's say, from there, let's say the whole snowball started, and then we just kept it rolling. Mm-hmm. And once we were set up in, let's say, in the German part, then immediately afterwards, we went very quickly in all other major European markets, because we wanted to maintain this kind of first mover advantage. So we were the first smart lock in Europe, and then we, in the course of 6 or 9 months, we also launched into Italy, Spain, France, Benelux, and so on. So just to have it all covered. Now it's already 5 years later, and I mean, we are still a very fast-growing company, but we are still also trying to understand local customers. It's a job that never ends, I think, because it's really complex, and expanding out into, offline retail stores somewhere in Portugal and managing all out of Austria is a challenge too. So
and what is different than the marketing, or what is the different thing when you're exporting to the other countries, or maybe to the south of or north of Germany in communication?
So, for example, we are a consumer electronics company, and the retail landscape in every market is different. So, as was already mentioned by the others here, in some markets have already, let's say, more e-commerce share of total commerce, others lower, and so on. So these are all factors that you need to consider. Then, for example, in our case, as a consumer electronics company, Amazon is a very relevant partner. Now, the position of Amazon in every market is not as strong. In Germany, for example, they are really, really strong on the market. In the Benelux, not very strong. And this means then there is, in the case of Netherlands, for example, there is Bol or Coolblue, which are jumping into that role. And you have this kind of different setup almost everywhere in terms of retail landscape. And on top of that, of course, also in your messaging and how you approach customers, again, is different in every market. Or the thing that we just said about delivery times.
How do you do that survey? Do you just call a company in Germany and then start exporting, or how does it work concrete? How do you learn to know the markets?
Well, we always went quite a lot for learning by doing. So in the end, we set up, of course, let's say distribution and fulfillment setup with partners so that we are able to deliver. And then we went in with e-commerce online advertising approach. And then listened to the feedback of our users and community. So we were always very close to our users. That helped us to learn and adapt quickly. And that's how you can best understand, I think, your, let's say, customer expectations in the digital age.
And other than your unique product, what was the key of your growth in Europe?
Well, it was, first of all, it was definitely being first mover. So also that helps, of course, if you are the first one to fulfill on that use case. Then, as you said, we have and still have a unique product. And then the third thing was, I think that we are also a distribution innovation. So Nuki was designed that it is so easy to install that you don't need a professionalist. You can do it on your own. You don't need additional tooling. And with that approach, we were the first product in the category that is truly made for online shopping. And that opened up, let's say, a whole new market for us, and also a much faster expansion into other countries. Because if you would need to go offline all over, it's going to be a lot slower and much more effort. But we were able to go in online, do online advertising, get the whole model going, learn from our community, and so on. That just is a huge accelerator.
And it's learning by doing. But what did you learn over the years of growing your European market share that you wish you knew when you first started exporting?
Oh, I can write a book about it.
The most important topics then.
No, but I mean, in the end, we were really underestimating how different European markets are. And that goes through, let's say, all the different stages in the customer journey. And we already had it, for example, in the Netherlands, obviously, due to the geography also of the market, people are used to getting very fast online deliveries. That is totally different in other markets and so on. So these are just things that you need to learn. And in retrospect, the biggest positive learning, one that we knew in advance and that I think is really key for anybody else going down that road, is definitely that you need to start and already have, let's say, a pan-European setup in mind. Otherwise, it's going to be
you need to have a plan.
Very hard and bloody to get there. Yes.
Yes. And what role do marketplaces play in your cross-border strategy?
Well, for us, they are, of course, important partners. I mentioned Amazon earlier, and I mean, these are, from our perspective as a brand, these are vehicles that can help you a lot in scaling. So I don't know, the first time where we were on Black Friday sales on Amazon, it was really eye-opening for us how many units you can sell and ship and so on in one day in the end. And that is, of course, also nowadays in our online shop where we have our full distribution chain, where we can ship now much larger volumes already. So it's really good to see that kind of scale.
Yes. And Crystal, from the logistics side, are there certain things as factors of a successful exporting strategy in Europe?
So you mean like what are the success factors?
Yeah, the success factors of exporting.
Yeah. So yeah, know your market, for instance, for sure, and know who your customers are there, and of course, do not rely or you need to know that they are not do not have the same habits as your domestic market. So be on top of that. And there we can support with exactly those studies that what we see in the market, what the needs are of those consumers.
So you don't need to do a survey yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
You already did it.
Yeah, we did our survey there, and there we can support our customers in saying, okay, for this and that country, maybe you need to offer like collection points. And those markets are more in need, as already said, are more in need of express service. And so, yeah, where we need to adapt to the needs of the local consumers.
Yes. And looking further afield to other regions, how can European e-commerce businesses ensure they have a solid foundation to give them a chance to successfully penetrate markets overseas?
Yeah. So I think they need to be prepared, right? So I think we rely too much ourselves on the European ease of doing commerce with our business, with our member states.
Yeah.
So as soon as you start exporting, you experience that it becomes very complex. And of course, for our customers, complexity is raising, and it might be daunting for them as well. So you need to have it right from the first moment. That's important. So there are some critical factors that you need to consider before you start shipping. First of all, you need to know your product, where it is made, what it is made for, for whom it is made, and then so that you can make the required paperwork, because paperwork for customs is very important. Otherwise, it might cause delays and additional charges.
Yes.
Then you need to know your commodities as well, because the nature of the goods also is defining the amount of the taxes. So also there, if this is not correct, it can apply some additional costs and fines. Then you need to check whether there are some prohibited articles, because certain destination countries, there are some prohibited articles, so you cannot ship them. Check for certificates, because it can also be that for the nature of your goods is asking certain certificates. And then I would like to refer to the official regulations of each individual import country. Then another one is do research on tariffs and taxes and duties upfront, because it might be that your products are eligible for preferential tariffs due to some free trade agreements with those specific countries. And then you also need to adapt your paperwork to it. And then last but not least, make sure that there is a commercial invoice to your shipment. And it might sound a little bit a basic step, but what we see these days is that customers often forget to add an invoice to their international shipments, and that it is incomplete or it does not have the necessary information on it. And then, of course, it is causing delays, and you might lose your international customers also.
Yeah, it's not good for the customer experience.
No, it's not good for the customer experience. So, and what we have our international knowledge base. So customers can consult this and look for the tariff codes, but they can also look up the goods specifically and see what the taxes are, what the duties are, and what the brokerage costs are. And this brings me to another important point, because it's very important that prior to the sale, you advise or you let your customer, your consumer know what the total cost will be. So really before they do the
taxes.
Exactly. Really before the purchase, so that they know everything, and then they can easily do, and they know what's coming afterwards.
We see this problem in England right now.
Exactly, with the Brexit.
Yes. I ordered some things from England, and then I get a bill afterwards.
On top, you got like VAT and duties on top.
I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And Martin, you export most of your products to in Europe, but you also export a bit worldwide. What were some key differences in your experience between exporting to Europe and exporting to other regions outside Europe?
Well, in the end, it gets much more complex. That is the key learning.
we just heard.
I'm always surprised when and I'm not very much into all the customs and so on regulations, but when my operations team is telling me how complex it is to just deliver one package into, I don't know, Israel or so, then I'm always quite surprised how much paperwork is actually required. We felt the same firsthand now with Brexit, because that was also creating huge complexities on our side. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, in the end is very difficult. And I can just confirm that, and that was learning for us. Let's say going overseas, we don't have this kind of, we go in the market and then we learn with the customer's approach. But when going overseas, we now definitely apply an approach where we say, okay, if we enter this market, then we really need to be prepared and need to make sure that shipments, invoices, customs, and so on, everything is set up correctly. Otherwise, we have learned it turns out to be a nightmare in the end. So that
is it financially attractive for you?
Well, of course, it can be financially attractive because when there is demand, then you can make it financially attractive. And our product is more a luxury article. That's also why the most relevant markets outside of Europe are countries like Israel and so on, where you still have very high purchasing power.
Yeah.
So, of course, there is a market and it's interesting and so on. But you also need to take care of having a really good setup in order to be able to have goods flowing in and out of the country also efficiently, so that again it's also a lucrative business.
Yes. And Luca, what are key challenges your members face when targeting and exporting to other regions outside of Europe?
Yeah, maybe it's good to mention that the members of e-commerce Europe are mostly national e-commerce associations, that they come from all over Europe. So I receive limited feedback directly from the merchants that are trying to expand to markets overseas specifically. Also because the focus of e-commerce Europe is mostly the European Union. But I can of course mention some obvious key challenges that were mentioned also before. Dealing with local rules, that's probably the biggest challenge. You have customs indeed, you have taxation, but you also have data protection, you also have contract and consumer law, product safety regulations. I mean, there are a lot of different rules that could apply to each country, so it's difficult to deal with all of them. Then you have the delivery. If it is at long distances, it might be costly. You might also want to ensure appropriate customer support, and if you're far away, that might be a challenge. You have the different customer culture that you have to take into account. So it's a lot to take on board. Of course, if there is some sort of cooperation between the third countries and the European Union in the form of an FTA or something else, this can help. And this is a little bit the life of European merchants trying to expand overseas. And then an alternative would be to use online marketplaces, online platforms that would be, a valuable help for European companies willing to expand to third countries, although there is a cost for that because they take a commission, and it's normal that they do because they take care of the various procedures for the merchants. So I think this would be this would be it. Yeah.
And are there trends that determine a successful approach?
I'm not sure if I am the best suited person to answer this question for the same reason of before, that we have limited feedback from companies on
yes.
This. So I would say maybe the marketplace. I mean, the marketplace would be a successful approach, in my opinion, because it would be easier to have somebody else doing the job for you, although you have to pay this person. So it's an extra cost for you.
Yeah,
that's maybe what I can mention. Yeah.
And Martin, how do you optimize your e-commerce for international trade?
Yeah, as I said, we are trying to analyze very much in detail in advance.
Mhm.
Second thing is we also go with partners who are specialized on international trade, because it's not a skill, let's say that, or we are not yet big enough to have that skill in-house. So we are more or less reliant on external partners. And then with those external partners, I mean, you really need partners who have a global footprint. So when it comes to e-commerce fulfillment, for example, I mean, our products are used in 160 or 170 countries worldwide.
Yeah.
So this means also we need to have a fulfillment partner in those markets who can at least in theory fulfill in those countries. This doesn't mean that we are on a daily basis selling hundreds of units into, I don't know, Tajikistan, but there may be an order one day for Tajikistan, and the whole volume of, in Nuki, we call it rest of the world. That is everything that we have in those, let's say, long tail markets. The whole volume still makes up 10 to 20% of our sales. So it's a relevant revenue contributor. And we wouldn't be able to fulfill that need without, let's say, partners who are really set up for that and have a true global footprint.
Yes. And maybe and we are almost at the end of the session. Maybe a last question for all of you. Do you have an advice for the people who are watching, the businesses who want to start a business in exporting? Luca, do you have a golden advice? What do they really need to do, or don't forget?
At least from the perspective of a European association like e-commerce Europe. Our role is to bring all these issues to the attention of the policymakers that are drafting the rules. So we advocate for a better regulatory framework for e-commerce retailers. So what companies can do, in my opinion, is really to go and talk to their national e-commerce associations, share their problems, share what's not working for them. And then these national associations will bring these issues to our attention in Brussels, and maybe we can do something good to help them with legislation. At least that's what we are trying to do in Belgium. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you, Luca. And you, Martin?
My advice would be to think big. So the world can be a huge market for you. It's much larger than your home market is. So it definitely makes sense to go beyond and think big right from the beginning. And then probably a second advice is, for your journey, pick the right partners. So if you think big, go for partners who also think big and who can help you in scaling the business beyond the initial phase.
Thank you, Martin. And Crystal, maybe
I think it's
last but not least.
a conclusion of what Luca and Martin is saying. So get the basics right before you start. So know the ins and the outs of your products, of your customers, of your market. And transportation-wise, of course, so that everything is in place and that's you're ready to start, and that upfront.
And check the surveys you've already done.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you very much, the three of you, for for the good discussion and also your good advices. Yes, and with this we've come to an end of this first episode of GoBeyond series. I would also like to thank you for watching this first episode of the GoBeyond series. Have a nice day.